I'm really very happy and privileged that you have attended in this competition of different panels our roundtable discussion, which indeed deals with a very sensitive topic, Russophones and the Baltic states. I have a feeling that I have to perform here. It's like such a huge stage, and we will have to somehow perform, do a performance here. The panel has emerged actually and is part and parcel of our ongoing research, 3-year research project that was supported by Latvian Science Council, the Baltic Russophone, Identity in Flux, Political Behavior, Boundary Making and Media Practices after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And here all the panelists in this roundtable discussion are part of this research project. There is one Estonian, though, who is not here, but he will be in the next panel for sure. So the aim of our project is to study the identity dynamics of Latvian and Estonian Russophones. We will, I think, consistently be using Russophones instead of Russian speakers, but let's see how it works. In light of Russia's full-scale invasion, how the identity has changed, whether it has changed, which direction it has taken, and where is it heading to. So we have different methods that we are using in this project, starting with very conventional cross-sectional survey data collecting, then focus group discussions, and then more maybe less known, less well-known, but still very informative, like media diaries, online ethnography. And it started a year ago, and we are somewhere in the middle, and so this is like a first, so to say, progress report. And as our topic is so consistent in terms of our focus, we decided instead of presenting papers, we would like to discuss actually this topic in a roundtable format. So, but before we start our discussion, just let me introduce you with the participants. First, on the right from me is Inta Mieriņa. She is a tenured professor of political sociology at the University of Latvia. Her work centers on migration and interethnic relations, and in 2024 she received an ERC Consolidator grant for the project Welcoming Immigrants in Central and Eastern Europe, Lessons from Russia's Invasion of Ukraine. Then is Oksana Žabko. Yeah. She's also a sociologist and researcher at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology at the University of Latvia. She studies labor migration and its social consequences, especially in the aftermath of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then Jānis Juzefovičs is a senior researcher at Riga Stradins University, Faculty of Social Sciences. His scholarship examines media audiences in the Baltic states with extensive work on Russian-speaking audiences in Latvia and Estonia. Many articles over the last years have been published, co-authored by Jānis, about Russian-speaking audiences. And then finally, last but not least, Anastasija Tetarenko Supe is a PhD candidate at the University of Latvia, lecturer and researcher at the University of Latvia, and also a political journalist, I should add, I think. And her research interests lie in political communication, with particular focus on security, domestic politics, and media policy. Me, as a moderator, I'm Mārtiņš Kaprāns. I'm a senior researcher at the University of Latvia. And let's start this discussion with one slide that actually triggered our curiosity and perhaps was also the cause of why we decided to submit the proposal to conference committee to organize this and not other roundtable discussion about this topic, which is rather focused. And this is a slide that combines two survey waves from two surveys. One was conducted in 2023, commissioned by Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Estonia and Latvia. And then the next one is absolutely fresh, right from the field. We received the file, the SPSS file, 2 days ago from Nordstat, the company that we contracted for conducting field work in both countries. There are plenty of questions, but there is one that is tightly related to the topic of our today's discussion, and it is which side, regarding Russia's so-called military operation, we can discuss about should we use so-called, of course, operation against Ukraine, which of the belligerents do you sympathize with? And then there is this very simple scale, Russia, Ukraine, neither Ukraine nor Russia, and then difficult to say, no answer. And what we can see, these red bars or red segments of these bars represent the dominant opinion in both countries of Russophones. And it is that they do not take position or do not position. One could also interpret they hesitate perhaps. Actually, we are still open to interpret what is happening there. But what is interesting, even comparing 23rd and 25th year waves, so from these 2 years, we can see that there is a certain persistency. And it hasn't changed a lot since 23. And we can say that this is a persistent, dominant hesitancy, non-positioning, uncertainty. So with this intriguing interpretations of what we have and what we can see here, I would like to pass floor to Inta Mieriņa, who could maybe delve into some details and trying to at least provide her interpretation of what is happening here.
Yeah, thank you, Mārtiņš. Really a pleasure to be here. I hope that my microphone works well. Right? Okay, so I think this, I'm really pleased to be involved in this project because I think this question that Mārtiņš posed is really an interesting one. Because if we have so many people saying, giving an ambiguous answer, like which side you are on, I don't really know, neither side and so on. The question is really, what do these numbers hide? Does that mean that there are many more Putin supporters and those who would support Russia? Than the numbers show, and they just are hesitant to voice these opinions in the current political climate? Or does that really mean that they really don't know which side to support, and that they're genuinely confused and generally don't want to take any sides because of some emotional or some other reasons? So this is what we were trying to explore, and just in these few brief minutes, starting up the discussion, I will highlight a few possible arguments that came out from our initial, from our preliminary research, both the survey data as well as the focus group discussions that we conducted in Latvia and in Estonia. Well, first of all, first thing to take into account is that we are living in a situation where Russians, specifically Russians, but in general, Russophone community in the Baltic states is increasingly securitized. Their loyalty increasingly questioned in the context of the possible security risks. You can see that in the media, you can see that in everyday conversations. People feel that, and we also saw this in the discussions as well, right? This increasing suspicion, increasing questions like, what do you really think? What do you really think? Which side you're really on? What would you do if something like this happened in Latvia? So, and this is one of the reasons, perhaps also, why when we experience these profound shifts in policy in regards to Russian speakers in the Baltic states, including, for example, moving away from the Russian language in schools and the media and so on, including taking down the Soviet monuments, we saw very little actual resistance from the Russian speakers. And partially also, as the focus group discussion showed, was that the political climate is such that if you try to object, sometimes you would just be called like a Putin supporter, as a fifth column, as a hidden supporter of the Kremlin and so on. So basically, there's a lot of pressure to stay quiet, and basically these nationalizing policies have gotten almost like a lot of support to be implemented without much resistance. So this is a really right, and this is what I wanted to show. The survey shows that in general, attitudes towards Russians and the Russian speakers, both in Latvia and in Estonia, have worsened. 51% say that they have significantly worsened, and 25% more say that they have somewhat worsened. Right. So this is the climate we're living in right now. So another thing that I wanted to say is that when we ask about whether people feel that they can freely and without fear express their opinion on different matters, specifically political matters, majority of Russian speakers say that they cannot. So it's almost 2/3 of people, both in Latvia and in Estonia, feel that rather, probably cannot or definitely cannot express their political views, and especially those that relate to historical matters, as well as those, as well as opinions on the war in Ukraine. Right, but what is also interesting is that this pressure comes not from, for example, fear of being persecuted or fear of being arrested or something like this. This is still a democracy, right? And people realize that. But it's also about the social pressure. It's also about how will your colleagues view you, how will your Latvian friends view you, because this is also something that people consider, obviously. And it's also about self-censorship. This is another topic that we try to elaborate in our research, that approximately 80% of Russian speakers, they say that it's better to just stay quiet on some issues if you know that others will disagree. It's just safer to do so. Another thing is, of course, besides the censorship and besides the political climate where they don't feel safe to say what they think, is that there's a genuine confusion and about what is happening, and a genuine lack of understanding and interest. Sort of these things are all related, so I kind of put them together. But in many surveys, even beforehand, we've noticed that Russian speakers in general, they're less interested in politics than Latvians or Estonians are. And actually, as the study shows, I will just try to be quicker, many don't really care much about what is happening outside of their own country, and especially when we're talking about events in Ukraine, many Russians and Russian speakers say that they don't really care. That they're not that much interested. Again, there could be emotional reasons for this. We can discuss this later. Another thing is the problem of massive distrust in the media. My colleagues will talk about this more, but basically when we ask people what they think that, about how journalists are reflecting the events in Ukraine, absolute majority, 2/3 of respondents think that basically journalists will just say what their client wants them to say. So there's a profound distrust in the media, and it relates to all kinds of media, not just the national state media, but also the Russian state media, also the Russian opposition media, also the Western media, like any media at all. And again, approximately 80% say that there's so many opinions around that it's really difficult to discern where the truth is. And this is, again, part of the reason why people might genuinely be confused and say that, well, I don't really know who to support and which side to be on. So, yeah, that's my short introduction.
With this grim picture, I will pass floor to Oksana, who will maybe even make it look even darker. So, please.
Yes, thank you. I hope, yes, dear colleagues, I'm very pleased that you have joined this our discussion. So, Inta show and my colleagues Mārtiņš show you quantitative data which comes from public opinion polls, but I would like to add two arguments which comes from qualitative data. We have conducted several focus group discussions, which I would like to emphasize, which also is small interaction between different members of the society, which means that processes which happens in focus group discussions somehow reflect the processes which happens in our society. So, and I would like to add to Inta's story two arguments which could be explanation why there are so many people who said that they cannot choose any side and they do not support any side of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The first is that it is a reality of our societies that over the 30 years since the restoration of our independence, Baltic societies, mostly Latvia, we can say that's the same happening in Estonia, maybe less in Lithuania. We are living in discursive conflict situation regarding interpretation of our past, which means our history, and present politics. The most clearly distinctional factor which side and which of this discourse is taken, it is based on ethnic background or language community. Either it is Latvian or titular nation speakers, or it is Russian speakers or Russophones. But it is not, we cannot say that 100% of one or another group are holders or particular discourse, but we can say that most probably. So, which means that our society, they are aware about persistence of this discursive conflict, and the society have developed a conflict avoidance culture, which is characterized by, first, as I said, awareness of existence, that there is opposite views in society, and also at the same time there is willingness to maintain social relationships with other people, which with different social groups to which person belongs. So the quote which is given, I hope you see it, because during the morning session I found that it is hard to see, but I will read you if you allow. So you just realize that we have a small country where you live and where, for example, I have both Russian and Latvian friends, and we don't have any problems with each other. So, and then I would like to put emphasis, you gradually learn not to touch, to be careful about touching sensitive topics, not to talk about politics, for example, as in untested groups or in untested collectives. It is, say, in Latvia by younger generation of Russophones. It is one understanding, and it is a quite shared understanding that we would like to live in our society and without conflicts, as at least explicit conflicts. And the my second argument is that, but there is really private challenges to persons to take one's position, one side or another side position, or it is really the war in Ukraine has led to some identity crisis of Latvian Russophones. So, and there is another quotation which also somehow shows and gives ideas for our further discussions. My father is 100% Ukrainian, and my mother is 1% Russian. So, I have taken the position that I have the right to be somewhere in the middle. I cannot decide. It is said by older generation in focus group in Estonia last year. So at this moment, I would like to stop my conversation. So for Laura, yours.
Thank you, Oksana. And now we are moving, maybe focusing more on some particular topics and moving to media field. And Jānis will provide his insights how media perspective, media-related perspective can help us understand this hesitant, non-positioning group.
Okay, hello everyone. I also have some fresh survey data to share with you. So we asked the question, to what extent do you trust all these different news providers, information they provide about the events in Ukraine? As you can see, it is not only Russian news providers, but also Ukrainian and all the others that are much distrusted, something already Inta mentioned. And we have asked the same question also before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And what we have learned is that the number of those who say that they distrust Russian news providers, the number of those Russophones has increased, but also this has not made them more trustful towards all the other news providers. So what we basically see here is that this skeptical, cynical attitude towards all kinds of media and journalism in general has been cemented, consolidated among these audiences. And what we have here, and what I think well resonates with the survey data Mārtiņš presented at the beginning, is that we see this repeatedly in the research we've done before and after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, is this popular image among Russophones that there is some ideal media user, the one that is smart and critical, the one who believes that truth is somewhere in between, and that to understand complex, contradictory geopolitical issues, you have to consult all kinds of news providers and approach all of them with skepticism and cynicism, and then make your own judgments. This is some kind of normative ideal. It doesn't mean that it is exercised on a day-to-day basis, because it might be too demanding to exercise it on a daily basis. And few more survey data. Well, 62% in our recent survey says that journalists do not cover events truthfully. At the same time, almost half of those surveyed say that they think that social media content creators, that they are more free, independent in providing information and expressing opinions than journalists are. And what we see when we look at the data on media use is that with the ban on pro-Kremlin television channels and news sites, social media have become key source of news for Russophones in both countries. From conventional news media, it is only local Russian language news sites that play a prominent role. Such social media platforms as TikTok, Telegram, and YouTube, they are seen as some kind of embodiments of the ideals of freedom of speech, in contrast to mainstream media, which is seen as subjected to censorship and political instrumentalization. But social media can also serve as an escape from news and politics. And what we have learned from the survey data is that among those who rely mostly on social media as a source of news, among these groups, there is a higher proportion of those who say that they distrust all kinds of news sources. There is a higher proportion of those who say that they try to avoid news and news about politics. And also, what is important, there is a higher proportion of those who say that they support neither Russia nor Ukraine in Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So there is a link between news avoidance and ambiguity Mārtiņš talked about. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jānis. And now we will continue with media topic now by Anastasija, and you will be speaking from here, or?
Yeah, I will speak. Okay. As I won't show you any data on the screen, I will base my speech on actually the same data that my colleagues have seen, and on the in-depth interviews that also were made during our project. And I can say that quotes like "everybody understands everything" and "the thinking individuals can read between the lines," I think that these quotes describe our self-evaluation of respondents very well. However, the question of how, where, and what those Russian speakers read between those lines has become a hot potato in the realm of Latvian media, integration, and security policy, especially, of course, during the couple of last years. And since the full-scale war in Ukraine, Latvian politicians and authorities have transformed media landscape drastically by banning dozens of Russian state and propaganda media outlets, and it is continued to this day. And politicians believe that the disappearance of Russian media from Latvian media landscape will open the eyes of Latvian Russian speakers and encourage them to switch to Latvian media. But the data shows that those thoughts and presumptions turned out to be very, very naive, because Russian speakers not only rarely consume Latvian media, but also largely have migrated to social media platforms, which content is not only out of control, but also incomprehensible. Nevertheless, the switching of the blue screens has not visibly improved opinions regarding the ongoing situation in Latvia and outside it. Qualitative and quantitative data showed that a large part of Russian speakers still hold the narrative of Latvia as a failed state, and almost half of survey respondents believe that Latvia might even vanish from the earth in the next 100 years. The persistent narrative of failed state is not surprising because if we look at the content creators and the content they create, then we can see that this content is largely based on the dislike of events in Latvia, on economical struggles and other things, and it is presented in very sensational and entertaining manner. But also it is very important to note that the reproduction of failed state narratives is neither fully consistent with Russian propaganda about order of things, nor exclusive in one language group in Latvia. Firstly, data shows that narrative of failed state is also heavily based on things one can perceive by himself or by his social circle. In example, weak economics, economical position of unsuccessful governance, attitudes towards Russian, as we were seeing on the slides. And data also shows the high importance of friends, family, and colleagues informing worldwide and issues impacting persons' everyday life. And at the same time, fear of being punished of speaking not in line with the state's position makes Russian speakers evaluate their social circles more carefully, which might create more powerful trust in the information that comes from these better evaluated circles. And secondly, failed state narratives that thrive on people's dissatisfaction about quality of life are actively used in Latvia by populist politicians regardless of language. So these narratives flow also in Latvian media and Latvian social media sphere. And political actors aiming to achieve political aims surf on the wave of loud trust in government, while also promoting distrust of journalists and the news media at the same time. We see this also in the data. And while the majority thinks that a party that could represent the needs of Russian speakers is very necessary, Russians actually don't see their voice and values being represented in state-level policy. And the latest parliamentary elections that were held close to the start of the invasion of Ukraine, full invasion of Ukraine, has left the biggest Russian party out of our parliament. It also indicated the ability of Russian-speaking citizens to change the political landscape in Latvia by also not coming to elections. So this is my remarks.
Okay, thank you. Just a few clarifying questions, and then we will kind of probe into more, maybe deeper issues related to the hesitancy of Latvian and Estonian Russophones. One thing, and I really can't resist to ask this to Inta, maybe it will be too technocratic and too sociological question, but still, when we see this neither side and we see difficult to say, to what extent can we combine these two together and say actually they represent the same phenomenon? Difficult to say and not supporting any side. These are two kind of, do we speak about two distinctive attitudes, or whether it is the same, just, it's a linguistic, so to say, and conceptual problem?
That is a really good question, actually, and I hope that in our study we will shed more light on this as we proceed. But I do think that it is different in a sense that I would expect that people who, for example, And we know that from the survey. We know that majority of Russian speakers in Latvia and in Estonia, they have family in Russia, and they have friends in Russia, and many of them also have friends in Ukraine. So from that point as well, it's difficult to take sides because, of course, you know, they feel bad about both sides. Like genuinely, they really feel bad about both sides. So I could see that this is a separate argument in itself. But this don't know, again, I mean, the thing is that even before this study, we conducted in-depth interviews with young people in Daugavpils some years ago, which is where, like in 2015 and 16, and already then we discovered that there's a lot of genuine confusion about political matters among the young people, in a sense that, for example, many of them used, for example, the Kremlin media. This is where they got like this Kremlin point of view. Then at school they got something completely else. You know, the Latvian schools, right? Then at home, many of them don't speak about politics at all. So they really get this confused worldview, and so I'm not surprised that in these circumstances that comes out even more. But what I would like to emphasize is that how this context is a little different from what we've seen before is the political disengagement, the conscious political disengagement, in a sense that Juris, I think, already showed that it's not just that the Russian speakers are less interested in politics, but many of them, actually close to 60%, they consciously avoid politics. They consciously, like, specifically don't want to hear about it. It's not like I'm not interested, but I'm actively just don't want to hear about it and don't want to talk about it. So this is I think, this really interesting.
Well, that kind of links my next question to Oksana and Anastasija, but just pay attention to the fact that although this is the smallest share of those who don't want or don't have an opinion, it has increased significantly in both countries over the 2 years period. So that's, again, some kind of dynamic shows, although the hesitant part is not as dynamic, but the one that does not express or who admit that it's difficult to say and answer this question, that has increased in both countries. But about hesitation, not a hesitation, but avoiding. Jānis mentioned news avoidance, and I just mentioned war avoidance, not war avoidance, but avoiding the opinion about this war and not taking sides. You both have followed thoroughly to focus group discussions and explored focus group data. So what are these, so to say, explicit as well as implicit, you know, strategies of avoiding, sidestepping or deflecting the question about the war? How do they manage that? In natural conditions, so to say, which is of course not natural in focus group discussion, but still.
I say that the first, it is very specific language means, which includes, if we take critical discourse analysis as a starting point for analyzing these positions, we use very indirect language. Focus group is a strange place, so they start to speak about issues very carefully and using specific language means, which is somehow they try to make their opinion more or less neutral, but there is still some, they very carefully put some, how to say, they reflect or they reference to certain points outside focus group, and from these references we can catch which side they probably take or have taken. And it is, how to say, one by one they start to referencing, and then we see that it is like going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, like one circle, next circle, the third circle, and from these references everybody starts to understand. It means that we need to know reality and Russian language very good, at very good level, and also media and content. We as researchers have to know it very well to read between lines what position is taken. And it is, how to say, very interesting process. And I, as moderator of focus groups, can see that after an hour going such circles, everybody knows. And Anastasija was also present at this focus group, and then she said, "Oh, that person's taken that side, that person, that side." After focus groups, we can read. But at the beginning, it like going like circle, next circle, they referencing to, or they sometimes say that this could be understood only when you when you have psychological help, or when you go to it is like means that psychiatrist, and from these little words, you can understand how people feel about one or another issue.
Sociologist turns into therapist.
Yes,
okay.
somehow.
Yeah. I agree with Oksana about this language issue, because we know that at the beginning of the war, there was this struggle between, is it a war or is it this special military operation? And how those Russian speakers managed to avoid this is by using the word событие as event, situation, happening. And disaster is a colorful word, but событие is very neutral, very, it's a term, it's a word that doesn't put you in a category of whether you are with one side or with another. And we see this also in those data, that they have managed to find the right words, not to put themselves also in those conversations with us as scientists or researchers, and also with their colleagues, maybe because they don't really trust every other person they speak to.
And Jānis, finally, before turning to some more broader questions, you mentioned media trust, that has been low and has decreased, perhaps. We just discussed with Velo Petai about public media and the differences in both countries, in Latvia and Estonia, Russian language public media, and how the government has dealt with Russian language content in both media. To what extent do you think this has also somehow can account for this increasing distrust in Latvia, and maybe a bit relatively higher trust in Estonia that we can observe in data?
What we can see in terms of media use, that Russian speakers in Estonia, they use more public service media in Estonia than it is the case in Latvia. In terms of trust, I would say that there is this general skeptical, cynical attitude towards all kinds of media, and public media is often still seen as part of state apparatus, so some kind of governmental media channel. But what is really interesting, in Estonia there have been quite a lot of state subsidies provided to private media companies as well. And what we have seen in interviews with Russian speakers, that because of this fact that they have been now subsidized they have received subsidies from the government, they are also treated with great suspicion, because the Russian speakers have noticed that they have received this money from the government. So on one hand, the government wants to provide some healthy environment for local Russian language content to thrive, but at the same time, it makes audiences more suspicious towards also private media channels.
Because it's always a public information that the government is going to invest more money and develop some content, right? Okay, if we have started with Estonians and Latvians, and we always like to compare and juxtapose, of course, inevitably. Here, actually, you maybe can't see so well, but there are plenty. We have a battery of other questions where we test actually to what extent the Russophones in both countries are exposed to pro-Kremlin narratives that explain the war, rationalize the war. Here you maybe can't see in these data so well the striking difference, but in some other data, like, for example, that Ukrainians and Russians are the same nation. All these kind of, strategic narratives disseminated by Kremlin media and political actors. You can see always striking difference between Latvian Russophones in attitude of supporting these narratives and Estonian Russophones. So how comes that there is still this persisting gap between two countries in terms of how Russophones position? Because from what I heard from you, structurally it sounds like the conditions are almost the same. But still, when it comes to accepting or opposing to these narratives, we can always see that there is a much higher likelihood that Latvian Russophones will accept this pro-Kremlin narrative than, okay, maybe not much higher, but significantly higher, let's put it this way. So, any thoughts about this gap?
Well, maybe I can start. Well, the fact that Latvian Russophones and Latvians have been living in two different media spaces is something that we've talked about for decades already, right? So, and this has not disappeared. This problem has not disappeared with just, for example, cutting off the Kremlin media, right? Many people still find a way. They find a way to access the information they're used to on social media, on some other platforms, as our study shows as well. So that has an effect, obviously, and there's really a massive difference in how people, how Russian speakers and how Latvians view specific things. Some of the biggest differences that we see are related to, for example, whether Russia is a threat or not. Among Latvians, you would see about like 80% saying that Russia is a threat, and among Russians, you would say about 20%. Is a massive gap, right? So also, for example, in general about attitudes towards Russia, whether we should build better relations with Russia, as you know, to strengthen our security or no, whether we should build more rely on NATO and things like this. So there's a massive difference. Also, of course, in relation to the Soviet monuments, there's a massive difference in relation to what does it mean to be a good citizen, what does it mean, how important it is to learn the language.
I asked about Russian speakers in both countries, not difference between Latvians and Russian speakers, but a difference between Russian speakers in Latvia and Russian speakers in Estonia. The striking difference in many questions that we can observe, actually.
Right, I thought you asked about the Latvians and Russian.
No. That's obvious. Yeah. That's obvious. That's always has been there, yes. But I mean, I was asking about...
So maybe my colleagues have a...
Yes, I have an idea.
Yeah, okay.
But we, of course, have to test it. I think we can turn to history and composition to Russophones in Latvia and Estonia. For example, Riga was ahead of, in Latvia, and it is Baltic War...
Military...
Yes.
Yeah.
Head was located in Riga,
district, yeah.
Which means that in Latvia there is much more military Soviet military people, and they stayed in Latvia. If they was retired, they stayed in Latvia after restoration of independence. So I think that we have somehow different composition of Russophones.
So very historical explanation of that.
Yes, historical explanation.
Okay.
But it is just my hypothesis which emerged just at this moment. But we can maybe look...
We are here for hypothesizing,
yes,
actually. This is discussion.
Maybe we can look a little bit back to our past and who was our Russophones when we restored independence in Latvia and Estonia. Of course, as I know that some decisions regarding the integration Russophones in Latvia and Estonia was taken in different times. And maybe it is also some, I think maybe we can take history as a help to explain some.
Okay.
But I also wanted to say that, I mean, what we saw in the graphs and what we see in the survey as well, the difference between Latvian and Estonian Russophones is not that large in many questions, just to say. I mean, there's some difference, but not that large.
But if we take especially such kind of expression which somehow describes military, it involves military's way of thinking, so maybe we can turn to this.
So what do you mean, that Latvian Russophones are more kind of militarized in their...
Because there was
self-perception, self-image.
Baltic War, head of Baltic War apgabals,
district, yeah, military
yes,
district, yeah.
Yes.
I think that's the way how it is in English, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, different family histories. It led
different
to
family histories. So,
yes.
Okay.
I wanted to add by talking about day-to-day operations because of our geopolitical and geographical placements. We have seen during our interviews that there are people who live near the border with Russia and Belarus. They consume their media also now, and we know that there was not so much effort from Latvian state to cover all regions near the border with Latvian public media. And all the media access they had was free channels from Belarus and from Russia. And also they are still traveling.
So you're speaking about Latgale, just
about
to be clear,
Latgale
yes.
region, yeah, a region that is near close
southern
to
east of Latvia, or southeast.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they are still traveling to Belarus and Russia. And they are openly admitting it that they go to Minsk during their summer holidays. And of course, if you go there, you don't see they are not being hit, they are not being robbed, and etc. So they are more, so they will trust more the news that everything is okay there, and not trusting the local media that are saying that there are some problems in those countries.
Jānis, to what extent communication style differs
between Russian speakers in Latvia and Estonia? Yeah. I don't think there is actually that much of difference. We know that the trust in institutions is higher in Estonia in general. This includes also Russian speakers.
What?
Yeah. I think more positive attitude towards the government, but it's relative because we see that basically all the messages from the government are treated with suspicion in general. So.
I was actually surprised, considering how much better Estonia is doing economically, that the failed state narrative is still so prevalent among the Russian speakers in Estonia as well.
Okay, final question before we open the floor to audience. I actually want to problematize this hesitancy, large share of hesitant. I'm calling, that's how I'm framing them. This part of Russophone community, the hesitant part. Is it a threat actually, or is it an opportunity in terms of societal integration that we have such a large, persistent, now we can feel already persistent share in both countries that kind of, lead like somewhere in between all the time and see it as a, kind of the element or building block of their identity almost, this being in between. Is it a threat rather? Is it a threat, or it's more kind of opportunity for societal cohesion, in terms of policy making? Let's put it this way.
Right. Well, I think it's both. I think it's both as an opportunity and a threat. And I think we need to start with the fact that one of the big challenges these days is how to acknowledge the security needs of the country, meaning that, of course, there are some dangerous narratives that need to be somehow controlled or limited or something, but at the same time, not to somehow degrade the democracy and the democratic process, in a sense that people should not feel afraid to voice their opinions, because only in discussions, only if they open up, we can have some kind of discussion, we can try to convince, we can try to have a conversation. Because if people feel that they cannot voice their opinion, and if they just close down, they will just find the information that they need, they will find the circles that they want, for example, on the social media, that will become much more radicalized and more difficult to track and deal with. So it's important that people don't close down. So that's one thing. The other thing is about opportunity. This kind of don't knows, we notice them not just in a question about Ukraine. We notice in, for example, question about What does one think about the Crimea joining the Russian Federation? There's like about 40% don't know, but also, for example, about history. How did Latvia and Estonia become a part of the Soviet Union? 40% of Russians don't know somehow, you know, whether it was annexed or joined voluntarily. It's not a problem to answer for Latvians. So, I mean, what does this don't know mean in these kind of cases? And sometimes really it's like, because of these conflicting narratives that they've been faced, and because it is like, they really try to gather all this information from all these different sources. They really have a lot of distrust. They really have, you know, struggling to make sense of the world around them, and really building trust and trying to communicate and trying to sort of make sense of this complicated world, considering their identities as well, because for many that's a process also of dealing with their own their identities, with their own like roots, their family roots, their own histories. So acknowledging this and respectfully dealing with this is
so more opportunities. But
yeah.
Anyone about threats?
I want to add about threats because so positive topic, you know, we are talking about.
Yes, sounds very positive.
Yeah, we see that there are a lot more things that Latvian citizens and Russian speakers also are not having an opinion, and we see that is also in during election times. And in summer we will have our municipal elections. And now when we are looking at the data, what are the most popular parties among Latvian citizens, we see that there is a huge amount of people who don't know who they are going to vote for. And because of previous parliament elections, during which we were also seeing this huge amount of people who haven't decided what to vote for, we saw huge differences after the elections in our parliamentary composition, because the biggest Russian party was swept away. They had a huge amount of deputies there, but Russian-speaking citizens decided not to vote for them. And they were the part of this huge group who didn't say that they have, either they didn't say what they are going to vote for, or they really didn't knew what to vote for. So now, when we are approaching these municipal elections this summer, we are also looking at these data with, we're scared actually a little bit, because we don't know where we are going to. And as you were saying, that if people will find where to express their opinion. And there are political parties, there are populist politicians who allow those people to speak. And this is also how our political arena can be formed after all these events.
Yeah, that's good that you touched upon political consolidation of Russophone electorate that has been, to some extent, shaken in both countries. Jānis? Do you want to add anything? Okay, so maybe with this question of whether we should see it as a threat or opportunity to cohesion, societal cohesion in both countries, let's open the floor for audience questions. I see Velo first, and then yes, second. And there's, okay, nice, we have Mike also.
Big improvement, thank you. You've commented, so Velo Petar from the European Center for Minority Issues, you commented several times on that graph, but where you see the actual difference is the decrease in empathy, if I read it correctly, with Ukraine. So how do you explain that? Is it that the memories of Bucha and Mariupol have gone somehow after 2 years, and people are now in more of a flux about what the situation is like? Is it because of Ukrainian refugees that people are angry and frustrated with? Because we know that there are currents in the mainstream political arena which says that these are now problematic, migrants and things like that. So where's that coming from? Thank you.
Right, well, maybe I can answer.
So it has, just if those who don't see, it has the support to Ukraine has decreased in Latvia by roughly, actually 11 percentage points here. 9, yeah, sorry. And here by, Actually, there is a decline is even bigger by 12. Thanks. So you can see well. It's not so easy to see from that angle actually. But in both cases, you are right. Well, statistically speaking, this is the significant change. Well, here it's maybe not so significant, but this is significant change. And
so what I want to
anyone else?
I mean, what strikes me in this whole discussion for now 2 years is, and admittedly a horribly simplistic analogy, but it just comes back to my head over and over again, is this image of a child with two parents, and the parents are fighting, and you're being asked to choose which parent you love more. And I think that we can obviously say that, yes, I don't want to, okay, let's say the father is Russia and the father has done something horrible, and now, you know, we all have to support the mother because, you know, somehow that may be true in many ways, and we can try to push that wedge in there, but I don't think it's going to work all the time, because at the end of the day, you cannot just force people to renounce a part of their identity in the full manner. So it really speaks to some kind of nuanced message and understanding of and I'm not saying that there aren't Putinists or that there are not other problems or security threats, but if you look at these areas of the graph, I mean the dark red ones, you know, these are people in flux, and so to try to just assume that we can just ramrod them into some square peg in a round hole, you know, is going to be a problem. So it speaks a lot to political discourse, political policy and approach. Thank you.
If I can add, I think it's a really, really good, good topic that you've raised. Maybe this question is not ideal from the point of view that what we discovered in the focus group discussions is that people really differentiate between strana и государство, no, meaning like the state and the country. They still love the country, but they don't maybe like the state. They don't like the government, but they like this, you know, it's their homeland, right? I mean, so that's the thing, you know, they cannot, they feel for the Russians, for the ordinary Russians maybe, but not like they don't support Putin's actions. I mean, so it's really much more nuanced than maybe we were able to show. So this is partially, maybe that could explain like neither side, right? Because like they cannot denounce, they're really hesitant to denounce Russia as a country. They still love the country, they love the language, they would like their kids to know the culture and everything like this, what we see from the data. But they're not big fans of Putin.
Yeah, there is a question. And then, yeah.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. I have two questions. One is whether you have done any other comparisons with the general population of Latvia and Estonia, for example, on trust in the media. You know, the typical answer where they would say, oh, whoever pays them, they represent these news, whether the Latvians and Estonians think the same. And another question, in your charts, you showed that the Russian speakers, they feel that the attitude towards them has decreased, has worsened. Have you studied any reasons? Do the Russian speakers themselves give any reasons why they feel that? Or is there, you know, is this just a general attitude? Is this political discourse? Or are there actions like, I don't know, the Russians going to Russia and then they come back and they cannot re-enter the territory because they lost their permit, residence permits or things like that?
About media.
Yeah, as for trust in the media, I think it's important.
Speak up a bit, I think.
I think it's important to look at trust in the media in connection with trust in institutions overall. And we know very well from data going back to 1990s, I think, that ethnic Latvians, ethnic Estonians, they trust more institutions than Russian speakers, and this applies also to trust in media. But if you look at, of course, neither Russian speakers nor ethnic Latvians or ethnic Estonians, these are not homogeneous groups. But there is a tendency also among ethno-linguistic majority to be suspicious, cynical towards media. But there is, of course, difference when we ask about different kinds of topics. Let's say when it comes to COVID pandemic, there was quite a general cynicism towards media also among ethnic Latvians. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, then ethnic Latvians tend to support media narratives in contrast to Russian speakers. So there are nuances in this.
Yeah, I can answer about the second question. I think it's really important that you raise this, because oftentimes what we hear from the Kremlin media and from Putin specifically as well is about the Russophobia in the Baltic countries, right? And about the Nazism and the popularity of Nazism ideas and nationalism and all of these things, right? Like, oh my God, discrimination towards Russians and things like this. On the other hand, if you look at this in a geopolitical context, so what have Kremlin media been saying? They've been saying constantly about, for example, Medvedev said that he was basically asking the Russians abroad to engage in like sabotage activities as a response to the sanctions placed on Russia. This was literally his quote. Right, so we actually have seen many such activities by the Russian agents, you know, in different kinds of hybrid ways. So obviously, really, and also, for example, the narrative that was used in Ukraine, defending the Russian speakers. Right, so we also have our Russian speakers. We also have regions such as Donbass where we have like 70% of Russians. So obviously, that creates a sense of fear, and a justified sense of fear. Right? Because what is phobia? Some unjustified fear, right? What is happening is a direct response of Kremlin narratives, right? This sort of suspicion, and again, adding to what Anastasija was saying, right? That what we see in our discussions as well, that actually Russians in Latvia, they oftentimes almost feel like they're pressured, to kind of to show their loyalty. Latvians are annoyed at this like ambiguity, like, oh, well, I don't really know, and using these strange words like, situation and something. They want to know for sure that they can rely on their Russians, that the Russians will not be waiting for Russia's tanks with flowers, right? If things happen, right? So this is the reason. Of course, it's securitization is that kind of fear that has stemmed directly from what people are observing. So thank you.
Oh, Eva was here, but then, yes, many hands I can see, yes.
Thank you. First, I wanted to say it's not only Russian narrative, so there's no good guy. Both of you are responsible, both of you are guilty. Look what Trump says to, well, guys, Ukraine is not less guilty than Russia, Let's start from this position. So I guess it's they are working on this again, that there's corruption in Ukraine, and it is, of course, and then so on, and at the end of the day, there's inflation in Latvia because of war in Ukraine. They are living quite well. They are driving such a good cars and so on. So it's, I guess, this development of this narrative is pretty clear. But I wanted to ask about one of Inta's slides.
Do you want me to put this?
Yes.
Okay. It's a very raw data. They are rated?
Yes, but it's...
They are rated, I think.
Yes.
These are rated data, yeah. This one?
Yes. So, what does it's bad to be a bad guy, right? Evil guy. So, what do you think, what should happen to say that Russophones said, oh, it's significantly improved?
What should happen?
Yes,
to make Russophones answer that situation is...
Did you ask something, or just your hypothesis about this?
I mean, we always try to make these scales balanced. We don't want to make people feel that we are imposing.
No, that's a hypothetical question about what should change, what settings should change.
What should happen in Latvia to
this
make
bar much higher?
Russians say, situation significantly improved.
I think one of the nice things that we saw was that, I think it was like a year or so ago, we saw a demonstration in Vilnius by the Russian immigrants, by the Russian opposition, protesting Kremlin's actions and protesting the war in Ukraine. And I think if we saw more of such activities, then that could maybe change opinions as well. That we would see like the Russians actively opposing the war in Ukraine, right? So that if that answers a little bit.
We have plenty of questions here, so maybe let's leave it here. But there was and here, okay. And two, okay. That was a gentleman for a very long time, as I understand. Sorry, and then I noticed. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeremy Bowen. I'm the international editor of BBC News. Forgive this question, might be a bit ignorant on my part, but what about bilingualism? To what degree does that might change people's points of view? To what degree are Russian speakers in Latvia or Estonia also people who are equally comfortable in the other languages? First question. The next thing is, I notice you use Russian and Russian speakers quite interchangeably. Is that just my imagination? Are there Russian speakers who might regard themselves as Latvians who happen to speak Russian, or Estonians who happen to speak Russian, or are they seen very much as a separate community? Because in the course of my job, I spend quite a lot of time in Ukraine, and I find there that, particularly the young Ukrainians I work with, many of them come from Russian-speaking families and Russian-speaking cities, as much of Ukraine was until relatively speaking recently. And they only basically now speak Russian at home to their parents, because in their social lives they make a point of not speaking Russian because they were, their identity is primarily Ukrainian. It's not, in the same way in this country, we know very well that Irish people speak English, but they're not English, they're Irish. So these are possibly basic points, but please.
But do they speak Gaelic? Do they speak Gaelic?
A small proportion.
Small.
I come from Wales. 100% of Welsh people speak English. Like 10% speak Welsh, but as an English-speaking Welshman, I'm no less Welsh. I'm not English.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay, fair point. About bilingualism, is anyone willing to? Because what I can tell you from our surveys, there are no official census done, which could, support the argument about increasing or decreasing bilingualism within the Russophone community. But we can see that, and actually it's kind of also self-evident since, the youngest generation has been more and more socialized via Latvian language in schools. If I understand the question, No. In both countries, there are now very tremendous, serious reforms have been undertaken, and gradually they are moving to one language education system. So the goal is set that in 2030, in both countries, education will be fully either in Latvian or Estonian. There won't be so-called minority schools anymore, but maybe some special subjects like ethnographically or culturally related, but all the other topics will be in Latvian. So institutionally speaking, there are many factors that have been supporting, they are still supporting the trend towards bilingualism within the Russophone community. I think it's much interesting to ask about bilingualism within ethnic Latvian community or ethnic Estonian community, which is definitely decreasing. Bilingualism in terms of ability to speak Russian in linguistic majorities. Yep.
So, Edward Lucas, I just want to follow up on my friend Jeremy's point, because I recall a study quite a few years ago on political attitudes in Estonia among people who identified as Russian. And it showed that if you had perfect written Estonian, I probably graduated from an Estonian school or studied at Estonian university, your economic outcomes were a great deal better and sometimes even superior to Estonians. But secondly, your political views were much closer or near identical to Estonian. So it seems to me that breaking the society down into this crude Russian or Latvian category is not, I think, sufficiently adequate. I think one needs to know what the things like level of education and particularly level of knowledge of Latvian or Estonian, and it would be a much more powerful study if it had those details.
Right, so I can answer the second question, I think. It's a really fascinating thing to explore, actually, because we also have a colleague from Ukraine who emigrated in 2022, fled from Ukraine, as a result of Russian invasion. And basically, she's also a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. She says, I'm a Russian-speaking Ukrainian, from the east of Ukraine. And don't you have like Latvian-speaking Russians? And for us, it's like, well, no, there's no such a thing. I mean, you're either a Latvian or a Russian. There's no Latvian-speaking Russian. It's like what is that? Like a category. It doesn't really exist in people's minds, because language is so closely intertwined with ethnic identity. At least in Latvia, I'm sure in Estonia probably as well. And that's why actually sometimes we say there's Latvians and Russian speakers. We don't say Latvian speakers and Russian speakers, right? So that's another thing. But what exists is a category of LATVIA'S. It's like somebody belonging to Latvia, which is not really like a Latvian, but a person living in Latvia. And actually quite a few Russians identify as LATVIA'S, meaning that people who live in Latvia. So Latvians in general, the ethnic nationalism is quite prevalent in smaller countries such as Latvia, so we're not really an exception here, which means that Latvians are quite exclusive in who can be considered the Latvian, and mostly that revolves around knowing the Latvian language and being born in a Latvian family. So even in a passport, you're not really allowed to write that you're a Latvian if you don't have Latvian roots, right? But the good news is that in this study, we had a question about who can be considered as part of the Latvian nation. And in this regard, Latvians are, I was surprised how inclusive they are, that they would mostly be considering anybody who is born in the country, who wants to be a part of the country, as being a part of the Latvian nation. Not a Latvian, but a part of the Latvian nation.
But scholarly, of course, there is no such consensus. There is now a new book by Kevin Platt, who uses constantly, I think, in his book, Russian-speaking Latvians, the category. So there are different options, of course. I saw Timofey, and yeah, you for a very long time you are waiting.
Thank you. My name is Vineta Klemberg. I'm from Riga Stradins University in Latvia. We tend to perceive Russophones as a homogeneous group, and also here we are talking about them as a homogeneous group, but actually we can talk about at least several generations of Russophones in Latvia and Estonia, and also about several waves of immigration by the Russian-speaking people. So do you see any differences in between the Russophones in Latvia and Estonia in their attitudes towards the issues you are doing research on?
Maybe someone else, otherwise only Inta is speaking, maybe. Any differences? Jānis, you maybe in terms of audiences?
Okay, yeah, we see, let's say, in terms of younger generations, they have different media menus, but this applies also to ethnic Latvian youngsters and ethnic Estonian young people. So I wouldn't say that this is because of the family language they use. So yeah, I think the age is one crucial element when it comes to media use and when it comes to political attitudes.
We see during our focus group interviews that the age was a big crucial point, because older generation, older respondents, they actually there's a difference in knowledge of Latvian language. We saw that in our younger focus group discussions, they all admitted that they know Latvian quite well, and it was very interesting that one guy, a discussion was in Russian language, of course, and one guy forgot a word in Russian and used Latvian word instead. So I think it's very crucial point here. But during our older group generation, they didn't use Latvian words. They didn't actually speak a lot about Western as something they are looking at, while the youngsters said that they travel, they see a world, they are seeing maybe themselves there and in the Western world.
But also young people are not homogeneous group, so it's quite complex.
I just only want to add that I completely agree that our Russophones are very diverse group. They also have different roots. For example, old believers and those whose families came to Latvia only during Soviet times and so on. But it is very hard to, in public opinion pool, to catch all diversities of these people. We need to reduce the diversity to some very distinguishing variables. So we need to somehow, in public opinion polls, in quantitative survey, we try to use some of them, but not all variables who describe the variety and this heterogeneous.
It's even hard to capture it in the focus group transcript. Therefore, you have to listen the recordings, as Anastasija said, to hear how they are struggling with their language, Russian language sometimes, the younger generation. But yes, Timofey. Yep. Okay.
Hi, Hannah Dunster, University of Cambridge. I just want to come back to the little pink part of your graph. Which I think is really interesting, and I think maybe it's a little bit dangerous to see the resistance to making a decision as an inefficiency. In fact, no, go back to the other one. Yeah, no.
This one?
The one you were on.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can see that, no, yeah. So in 2025, less, like people are more undecided. Now, in a sense, these are both two snapshots in time, and it's not very dynamic, and people are probably changing their minds all the time. But actually, as they gain more information and they maybe have a more nuanced understanding of the complexities of the situation, they may become more undecided. So, in a sense, that's potentially a more optimal outcome rather than, being very sure about what you think you know. And I think, what we might want to move away from is sort of generations of people that vote for one party or one, whether it's Democrats and, Republicans or Labour or Conservative, where you have generations and generations which always vote in one direction. What's more kind of contemporary is that people make decisions based on, current situations and new understandings and new information. So I see that in quite a positive way. I also wanted to, say thank you to all the panelists actually for discussing what I think is a very sensitive and difficult topic. And I would like to ask, is there an area of the cultural sphere where you think, or the social sphere, where there's more opportunity to come together and discuss some of these delicate issues? Because one of the things that kept coming back to it, you all mentioned it at some point, is this issue of trust. And I think there's obviously been a degradation of, institutional trust, community trust, individual trust. And this is a kind of classical sociological framing. So are there spaces in either country where there is an opportunity, where there might be a bit more trust, where you could have these delicate and nuanced conversations?
You mean in the public space?
Yeah.
In public sphere, yes.
Yeah. In certain sectors of society, whether,
I think if we look at our cultural space in Latvia, then for now it is quite, maybe, I will use the word toxic to mention that Russians will participate or whatever. But from previous years, we have seen that, for example, our national heritage Song and Dance Festival is that place where Russians and Latvians are quite united. And also in the media, Russians are portrayed as being integrated into Latvian culture when they are singing in Latvian language and participating in every cultural activities. But now there is quite difficult to find some events or something like that where you will see them two language groups very friendly, spending their time very friendly.
Right. Well, I can maybe add. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think what is really dangerous is the narrative of like there are no good Russians. This is like really, really dangerous. And we saw like what surprised me in the survey that we noticed is that we also asked about, for example, whether Latvia should accept like as refugees the Russian opposition media and those opposing Putin and so on. And actually, Latvians are negative towards them as well, to a similar extent as to any Russians. Really, it doesn't matter that they're opposition. There's still a suspicion that, oh, maybe they're just saying that. Maybe they're not really. I mean, and so this is a big problem. And also, there have been studies showing that actually those leaving Russia now, most of them are anti-Putin, and actually way more than the existing Russians within our country. Right, and they still get securitized, and we still have almost closed the borders. And I mean, this whole narrative is sort of really toxic.
Okay, we have 7 minutes left, and let's collect last two questions. One Timofey and one here. I see the gentleman here. Yes, and then.
Thank you. I am Timofey Garin from Queen's University Belfast. Very interesting to see all these graphs, and myself and my colleague Rio Nakai here. We have been looking at public opinion surveys ourselves, so if anyone's interested why people actually say don't know, do come to our paper tomorrow. I think we all agree, regardless of our political views and beliefs, how identity plays into opinions, that people answer all the questions for various reasons. So if you ask them are you against Ukraine, or you for Ukraine, or for Russia, they will give you similar answers, but the reasons for these would be difficult. So I would just want to throw this in as a point of conversation that I think picks up on various threads that were mentioned here, that there are certainly ethnic reasons or ethnic identity reasons for people to identify more with one country or the other. Social status, education levels, all of this is invisible in these graphs that are two-dimensional. And that is an important point to keep in mind and reflect more when we present our glossy findings from public opinion surveys for discussion in panels. I think that's important to emphasize because there are multi-causal reasons for people to identify with one side or the other, and that should be really taken more seriously. And the second point I wanted to bring into the conversation here, and I think the question from the front row here was asked, what happened in Latvia that would have made life for Russians better? Well, looking at the dates of these surveys, I remember only one thing, that the state of Latvia encouraged Russian citizens to re-register their permanent residency permits at the time. And that is definitely not a sign of like accommodation of Russian-speaking community, which definitely plays into Russian speakers' perception that they are not welcome, that their situation has definitely not improved. Whatever else has happened in the country might have played a role, but that definitely hasn't supported the view that the state of Latvia is interested in its Russian speakers / long-term residents with Russian citizenship. So my question finally here is, can we actually trust any of these results showing us only the view of, or the opinions collected from Russian-speaking population in both countries? Because the basic assumption, the epistemic assumption, message sent here is Russians in Latvia, Russians in Estonia live in in different countries from Latvians in Latvia and Estonians in Estonia. Because we don't see in public opinion of Latvians and Estonians in neither of those cases.
Not in this chart.
Thank you.
Thanks. And the last one, and then we have some 5 minutes to reflect on these questions. No, there is a gentleman here, yes.
Hi, I'm Casper Schultz from the University of Cambridge as well. I'm a master's student here. And it's a similar question to some of the other questioners, and it pertains to an article that I think Mārtiņš and Inta wrote a couple of years ago, which broadly divided the Russophone identity into three categories. So on the one hand, you had the compatriots, who were perhaps more attached towards Russia than towards Latvia. You had the critical moderates with attachments to Latvia and Russia, and you had the Russian Europeans who were much more firmly in the European or Latvian camp, so to speak. And I was wondering, sort of in light of legislative changes in the last few years with regards to language, education, it doesn't strike me that this would do much to pull critical moderates closer to Latvia, or certainly doesn't do much to pull compatriots closer to Latvia. And I wondered, do you think that assumption is misguided? And B, if not, what sort of practical steps can the Latvian government perhaps take to speak to these people and perhaps foster more societal integration on that basis? Thank you.
So the last part of your question somehow overlaps what Timofey said also about what can be done, or what is where we have gone the wrong way. Okay, so any reflections on both questions?
What can be done was the question, yes. What could be done in terms of our political parties? We see that during a lot of previous years, there were several parties that were run by a quote, "Russians are coming." And after 2022, they are now saying, look, we were always saying that Russians are coming, and they came. And now, please elect us, because we are saying that there is a Russia but next to Latvia, and they will come to us. Yes. So for now, we can see that talking about Russians, about Russian integration, is very toxic now, because it's pre-election time. And when you are talking about Russians, you are marked as a bad person in Latvia, so your ratings are falling. But there are also those populist parties who enjoy this, speaking also about Russians, because they are gaining credits, they are gaining their popularity. So now we can see in our political sphere this rivalry between parties that say, oh, Russians are coming, be prepared and beware. And other part that are saying that Russia isn't a threat, that we have to be friendly with Russia, and something like that. So now from the government part, there actually is none. Government isn't proposing anything actually to integrate Russian speakers. So yeah, there's no positive answer to this question.
2 minutes from me, yeah? Okay. So, yeah, talking about what can be done, one of the things that Latvia does differently than Estonia is that Latvia has made a decision to phase out the state-funded Russian-speaking media, which I believe, and at least some of my colleagues, that this is a big mistake, because people will just, instead of providing them credible information and trusted information, they will just, they will just find other kind of information that might not be so trusted, and maybe some, maybe hateful and so on. But that's a bigger discussion that maybe my colleagues can talk about. But in this political climate, oftentimes, even if, for example, as researchers or politicians, if we give an interview to the currently funded state, media in a Russian language, we are being attacked. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you still speaking Russian in this political climate? Where is your national pride, right? And even we are asked really tough questions and attacked if we even about the fact that we still conduct surveys in Russian. How can you still conduct surveys in Russian?
Inta, I just want to say that also the current project has also been questioned.
Yes, and not just by
should government give money to research Russophones?
Yeah. Not just by exactly, and not just by respondents, but also by some of our colleagues. like, why are you doing this? Why are you talking to them in Russian? And we're like, well, we want to know what they actually think, because this could also be a security issue, right? So talking about how reliable the data can be, of course, this is just a preliminary analysis, and we will conduct way more complex modeling as the project proceeds, in order to really shed light on which are the most important factors that explain, like, looking at them in combination as in some regression models and so on. In addition, we also have surveys where we compare some of these indicators between Russian speakers and Latvians. So we know for sure, for example, that interest in politics is way lower among Russian speakers than it is among Latvians. So there's this comparative aspect as well that we didn't show today just because of time limitations. So just, this is the work to come.
Okay, thank you for your questions. And of course, what Timofey asked, it is still, we are also open towards critical reflections about these data. And we could also easily ask many important conceptual aspects. How much, to what extent we can see tipping point. You remember, David Layton talked in another context about tipping points. To what extent there is this tipping point or not as any tipping point, or maybe this is some kind of adaptive response that was going to, evaporate as the war ends. Plus, let's keep in mind that the data were collected during the inauguration of Donald Trump, who was quite outspoken about Ukraine, as you remember, and it definitely also resonated to some extent within the Russophone communities here in the Baltic states. So we are critical towards data, and thanks for raising this question. We will go to your panel to listen the alternative interpretations. Thank you, Timofey, and thanks for coming to our roundtable discussion. And let's keep thinking about Russophones in the Baltic states.